Heston Russell, welcome to Three Food Memories.
Thank you so much for having me.
A few years ago, you set up and funded a political party called the Australian Values Party, a party focused on the rights of veterans with policy positions on other subjects as well. Mm-hmm. What are these Australian values that you hold close to your heart?
Well, in the military, everything's very values-based. It's sort of having the right person with the right attitudes that we can put into any mission. And actually, during my whole process of trying to hold the ABC accountable, I was offered by nearly all the political parties to become a senator. I went through the process for a few and didn't really like a lot of the values that were being pushed on me, essentially. And I actually did some research and found that we have an Australian values statement. So the Department of Immigration has a value statement that if you come into Australia to gain citizenship or on a visa, you actually have to sign and agree this Australian value statement. And it's respect for the freedom and dignity of the individual, commitment to the rule of law, equality of opportunity, regardless of any race, sex, gender, and the right to a fair go as well as a few others. So I didn't even know this was here. Most Australians who live here don't even know it's there. So I adopted that as the value statement. Essentially, any piece of legislation that was to be argued in Parliament would need to be justified against those values and how it affected the people. That was our grand plan, essentially.
And growing up in suburban Brisbane, did any of that influence your Australian Values Party?
No, I think particularly it's my life in the military. I didn't really, I had a mixed childhood as far as understanding my own identity, and it was only during really that institutionalisation that you get from going from school straight into the military and 16 years that I served in there, and travelling the world and seeing different cultures and seeing how fortunate we have it here in Australia, that shaped a lot of my philosophy there.
So you were introduced to me by a mutual friend who was insistent that I have you on the podcast.
Oh, there you go.
So she sent me Vanessa.
Yes. Thanks, Vanessa.
So she sent me to your socials, and as I was scrolling through, I was like, "Oh, here's another fucking queen."
Wow!
Chubba chub.
Judging a book by its cover, love
chubba
that.
Chub puppy sucking on the dance floor. But then, as I went through it, I was like, "Hang on, there's a story here." And the more I scrolled, read stalk. The more I discovered there is a bigger story here that's not being told.
Yeah.
And it's part of the Australian story and it needs to be shared. What is this story?
I don't know. I think for me, so much of the story has been about learning yourself within a society that loves labels and, painting who you are from social media. And a lot of it's also been just about sort of being willing to break your own ground. I think particularly I've struggled right up until the last few years with my own identity, from military, special forces, never having a public profile, through to being thrust into public profile, keeping my sexuality a secret because I wasn't comfortable with it, through to it being, the way in which I probably gained most of my social media following. But coming from very humble and simple beginnings, I know there's always that lovely story about it. But I think for me, it's how fortunate we have it here in Australia, how unfortunately toxic a lot of our culture is, particularly this tall poppy cutting syndrome culture that I've definitely experienced a lot. But how, when you have the right purpose and the right people around you and you get out of your own way, you can actually achieve a lot. And I think that's sort of been my lesson, particularly these last few years.
How is lesson learning?
I love it. I mean, I have a very pragmatic brain. I think it's very much ingrained through my military upbringing. I love solving problems, and particularly looking at something and asking, why is it that way, instead of settling for it simply is. And particularly a large part of what we're trained in the military is every time we do something, whether we succeed or we fail, you constantly have to do a review process, a deliberate review process, and always see, did you just stumble across success? What were the failure points? And how can you continuously keep learning and innovating and evolving as people? And I think that's that mindset that I really enjoy.
Has what you learned in the military challenged you?
Yeah, definitely. In particular, I do a lot in the charity space at the moment, and it's just that shift in mindset where the military, as I said, is a values-based organisation, but at the end of the day, it's a for-purpose organisation. You're not chasing profit. And for example, when I talk about values, we would remove people from the special forces if they failed in integrity or teamwork or any of our other agreed values, even if they were the best performer. Whereas, as you could imagine, talking to corporates or life outside, if you don't represent yourself first, there's so much of a focus on performance and KPIs and less on about how you do what you do. There's far less accountability and enables people to have less integrity. It's been a shift in just appreciating the different mindset and the different values of society in the majority versus an institution like the military.
How has and how did the military, so when someone is ejected, what's the word when they're no longer?
Discharged.
When they're discharged.
Yeah.
How are they supported after a discharge?
Well, this has been the massive part. So we spent the last few years campaigning and supporting the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, because in service, people in the military have a suicide average of less than half the Australian community average, but that more than doubles when we transition out. And the military is great at deconstructing someone's identity to be subordinate to the mission and the team, you know. Same uniform, last names, haircuts similar to yours. But it's not about, there's no individuality. It's all a collective and it's all for the mission. And the way in which we primarily have been reconstructing people's identity outside of that institution has been to issue them with a resume or a CV or what job you can go on to perform like for like. And we don't have conversations like, hey, your job outside the military isn't going to provide you with the same level of family and home and belonging that you had in the military. And also, because you've come from an institution where you're meant to put yourself last, to ask for help is kind of seen as a bit of failure, or it has been when I was in, to then all of a sudden be outside where you need to put yourself first and potentially ask for help, going from somewhere where you were, you know, so motivated by all the extrinsic factors going on, to what most of us develop ADHD and all the rest because we're so overstimulated but understimulated outside. It's a really difficult place, and we haven't been doing that with people who have transitioned. We've been using civilian contractors and all this other thing. So this is one of the large findings from the Royal Commission. We need to put a lot more funding and support into standing up, particularly a veteran-led organisation, to do that. So,
and what was the pivotal moment for this change?
I really struggled in my own mental health, and I left the military. I took long service leave to move my boyfriend to Australia and open up Barry's boot camp. He was an instructor in LA.
You're part of Barry's boot camp.
Yeah, me and my partner led it to
I've met you
Australia
before.
and Singapore.
There you go. There's the connect.
We just did some red lights.
Oh, no. I met you at yes. Anyway, that's off mic.
Welcome.
I met you. I met you.
You didn't scroll far enough.
No, I didn't. I wasn't that interested.
Wow.
Jokes.
Wow.
No. Let's go back to Barry's. So
Yeah.
you came to
Yeah,
so you were involved in Barry's.
2015, I was posted over to the US for a year with their special forces, and I started taking Barry's. I loved it. I'd actually snapped my patella tendon the year before, and the first time I ran was in a red room on a Woodway treadmill. But long story short, I ended up dating Blake, who was a Barry's instructor in LA. And when I got back from my last deployment to Iraq in 2016, I went and lived in LA to be with him. And then I started opening new studios internationally, new studios for Barry's corporate. And then they opened up franchising to Australia, and I partnered with a group called the Fitness and Lifestyle Group, who owns Fitness First and all that, to open Barry's in Sydney, Melbourne and Singapore. Yeah.
Right, there's the connection. Well, let's move now. This makes all sense now.
Okay.
So first food. I've moved the order of your food memories around.
Okay, do it.
Just to kind of tidy up the storytelling.
Oh.
So your first food memory is the cookie cake.
Oh, okay.
Why have you chosen this?
Well, like I said, 2015, when I was in the US, I was actually stationed at a place called Fort Benning, or Columbus, Georgia, now south of Atlanta. And Blake's on the Park in Atlanta was the first gay club I actually snuck out to. But I developed a really great...
How old were you then?
I was turning 30 that November.
Sorry. Read your script, dickhead.
But yeah, I used to sneak up to Atlanta, and I developed a really good friendship with two ladies up there. Long story again, but one of them was actually the girlfriend of this American major who flew Apaches for me in Afghanistan. Small, small world. And they were some of the first who actually caught me and like, are you gay? I was like, I think so. So 2015 was when I accepted I was gay. And
to explain acceptance.
I grew up never knowingly meeting a gay person until I passed the commandos and came to Sydney in 2010. And Oxford Street was my first exposure to gay culture. And being in a completely alpha male environment, being an officer and a leader within the Special Forces, I didn't know about or resonate with particularly, I call it the sort of midriffs and drag queens version of the gay world. And particularly, I saw a lot of entitlement, whereas responsibility and not being defined by your sexuality was a massive part of our military culture. So when I went to the US and I started traveling to places like LA and New York, I really started to meet some very successful, very professional gay men that I didn't even know were gay until perhaps someone else told me. So it really helped me identify I could be my own brand. And there was just a click that happened in my brain one day. I was like, oh, I am gay. I don't need to be defined by it. I don't need to be scared by it. I just need to embrace it and be comfortable with it. So yeah, anyway, fast forward to November that year, my birthday, 9th of November. I had my friends threw me a 30th birthday party. Actually, it was before I went overseas because I was deploying overseas with the Americans for 4 months into the year. So before I deployed, they had a birthday for me in Atlanta. And I think my mum even came over for it and everything. Anyway, I don't like sponge cakes. I've never liked sponge cakes, like your traditional birthday cakes. So I usually always like the ice cream cake after having a McDonald's ice cream cake at a childhood party. Yeah. But they surprised me with this cookie cake. You know, it's as thin as like a pizza, a thin crust pizza, and as big as a pizza. And I think Mrs. Fields was the brand. I never had one before because, I mean, Australia, you think of a cookie and it's more like a biscuit, a bit dry. Yeah. It is still to this day the best cake I've ever had. And whenever I go to the US, I always try and have one.
Describe it to us.
Oh, so size of a pizza, kind of the consistency of what a Subway cookie is these days, but a little bit gooier.
You've done the research.
Yeah. But just better. I mean, it had all the trimmings, just like it was dressed like a cake with icing, and it had.
Was it chewy? Was it fudgy?
Chewy and gooey, and best when even slightly warm as well. Oh.
And was it an element? Obviously it was sweet, but there was an element of salt to it.
Yeah, savoury. Yeah, it just hit all the taste buds. Oh, and so Moorish, which is a word that Americans don't know as well.
So were you eating this thing? Oh, wow, this is so Moorish.
I remember I was like, oh, this is so Moorish. And they're like, is that like Amish? I'm like, no, Moorish. You have to Google and show them your phone. And anyway, yeah.
You have a close connection to the US. In fact, you're going to the US in a few days.
Friday,
for Halloween.
Yes.
You spoke briefly about your deployment with the US in 2015.
Yeah.
Australians have a strong military connection to the US.
Mm-hmm.
Give me an idea of how important this alliance is. Keep it unclassified because I don't want them to come and get me.
No. No, massively. I mean, the US is the big brother and US is the big power as far as the Western world goes for military. I haven't deployed overseas yet without having some form of interaction with either US military or US agencies, particularly in Afghanistan. Like, we flew in American helicopters out to every mission. We really have quite a embedded partnership with them. I also find the US culture is so very different. I think that's why I enjoy it in the US as well. They have really had to viscerally understand the need for a defense force from Pearl Harbor through to their Twin Towers. Most people have someone in their military that they're connected with. Corporate America really stands up and like, thank you for your service is a really big thing. And combined with sort of their very patriotic culture, it's just a very unique nexus. So particularly as a gay man in the military, in the Special Forces, people much more easily, I guess, understand me and my background in the US, whereas in Australia, it's quite the juxtaposition. I'm sort of quite the unicorn in that perspective. And Australia has different ideologies. A lot of people in Australia haven't had to really, particularly around my age and younger, haven't had to really think about why we have a military and what they do. You know, Afghanistan was this big war far away, whereas in the US it was much more visceral for them. Yeah.
How do the Americans treat their veterans?
At a social level, we say there's much more of a soft landing when their veterans transition. The US military is much more proactive in communicating what their veterans do. They're much more, engaged on social media and media. They speak out on topics, whereas Australia is much more reserved. I mean, I like to say when Afghanistan collapsed, I had so many media interviews asking me, like, was it worth it? The US didn't, because they took their whole public along with the journey. A lot of corporates in America have like veteran programs as part of their ESG, you know, their environment, social and governance requirements. There's a really big different focus on supporting their veterans after service in the US.
There's what's the per capita veterans in Australia versus veterans in the US?
Well, the census a few years ago identified there's like 560,000 veterans in Australia. In the US, it's millions and millions. I don't know the exact ratios, but it's, big. I mean, their military compared to ours is millions and millions as well, whereas ours is like 80,000.
So here's an interesting thing that I was thinking about. We support what you do. We really believe in our military. It's a very important function. But then, as a public, once you've done it, we're not really happy that you've done it, are we?
No.
What's that about?
Well, particularly for my generation of veterans these last few years, again, while we were overseas in Afghanistan, and my last deployment was to Iraq, fighting ISIS in Iraq and helping liberate Mosul. It was just incredible supporting the Iraqis over there. The Australian public doesn't know what we did. You know, we didn't invest enough in telling the stories.
Why aren't we telling them?
I don't know. It just wasn't a priority. It's always been a political ping pong piece, and it's been maintaining alliances and, all the rest. But since then, all of a sudden, the narrative's been taken over by this whole war crimes piece, and there's been individuals with agendas in the media that have been found, in the federal court per my defamation case. And there's just been a lack of understanding of what actually happens in war, which is also part of our job. Like, our job's not just to protect people physically, but also mentally and emotionally from like the traumas that are war. But to answer your question bluntly, I think it's a lack of leadership in Australia, particularly in the US, where they've had some of these issues where media have tried to attack. They've had generals and politicians stand forward and say, like, we're not having this. This is not what happens. Whereas in Australia, it's risk aversion.
Do you think it's also got to do a bit of the fact that there's no real threat here? This is God's country.
Agreed. Ignorance is bliss, and our isolation is so dangerous down here.
It's
in my
what
opinion.
actually all the things that we love about this country are the things that work against us too, don't they?
Well, I have a saying overseas: when there's no war outside the wire, the conflict comes within. Particularly,
say that one more time.
When there's no war outside the wire, conflict comes within. And particularly in Australia, we don't have many big world issues. You're over in the US, and there is gun violence, there is immigration issues, there is really big world issues. In Australia, there's not so much. We're pulling ourselves apart over historical identity.
Which is deeply important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But this is the whole thing. We're pulling ourselves apart over it as opposed to having discussions. It's being taken over by politics as opposed to like unified leadership.
It's also that thing of we don't know who we are because we don't know where we've come from.
Well, I think Australia has this terrible knack of just continuously looking forward and not actually sitting down and studying what many of our forefathers and foremothers wrote. Like I said at the start of this, we have a value statement. You go back and you actually read through the first two verses of the national anthem. You go back and read some of the Constitution. There's actually fantastic bedrock there. But as is the nature of our culture, we're caught up in the current news cycle and the next, and about grabbing attention and grabbing new things instead of doing like a deep dive study of where we've come from. And I was in Coachella in the US actually at the start of this year, dancing away with a friend, no lollipops. I knew you were going to say that. And he's a black American friend of mine, and he just turned to me and he's like, I only just found out recently that Australia came from being a penal colony. He's like, do you think that explains a lot of your culture? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, not a prisoner culture, but a jailer culture, like step out of line, get whacked, be seen to progressive by the others, get pulled back down, lots of rules, lots of regulations, being told what to do by people who don't usually do it themselves. Close the borders, isolate yourselves. I was like, that's quite insightful.
It is quite and confronting too, because look at what happened in the last 4 years with the pandemic. It's like there it all is.
Well, that's what they got to see. And unfortunately, that's how much it damaged our international reputation. I mean, again, I look at the US and Australia, like, we have 3 layers of government. Like the Westminster system is federal down to local. We have state in between, like similar to the US, but we have the same levels and layers of government for a country that has 340 million people.
But let's be clear, you're proudly Australian.
I mean, 5 generations of my family served and fought in the military. I'm proudly Australian, but I think we've got it wrong. And I think instead of spending the time to do what we did in the military when we get it wrong, to reflect and review, we're caught up in what's the next political segue to help win public opinion. And we're not actually focusing on deliberately looking to improve ourselves. We're looking on winning public opinion to win votes. And I think a lot of Australians are actually sick of that. And we've gone on a really deep political conversation here, which I haven't done for a while.
We can, no, that's okay.
Yeah,
we
right.
can. So it all comes from the brownie.
Yeah,
the
right. The cookie cake. Everyone needs more cookie cake, and you'd be happy.
What was in this cookie cake, by the way?
Huh? It was just lots of little like chocolate. They weren't like Smarties, but yeah. Oh,
Little
just
buttons.
gooey chocolate. Oh.
There you go. Let's talk about your coming out. You came out late in life, as you
30 or 29, turning 30. Yeah.
So, and you immersed yourself into literally a pit of high-achieving professional men who happen to be gay.
Yeah.
It's a middle-class privilege to be a white gay man in countries like America.
Yeah.
You get to
Better yet, being Australian as well.
and it's still
G'day.
G'day. You get to get your cake, and you get to eat it too. Unless you're shredding, then there's just getting cake, no eating. Nope. But coming from a life of military training and a boy from Brizzy, did you find this initial initiation overwhelming?
To be honest, I still do. I never had a single relationship, boy or girlfriend, throughout my military career. I kept until the very end. Until I figured out sort of what my sexuality was. I just kept myself so focused and aligned to purpose and achievement, and that's all the satisfaction I needed. I didn't need...
So where did connection come in then?
Connection came from, particularly as a platoon commander, connection came from the people I was responsible for and my team. At work, outside of work, we socialised together. You know, you're at that level of, bromance and mateship where you honestly would, if need be, lay down your life for these people. And that was... we call it a family by choice, and it's really difficult to explain it, but you can imagine when you've been through so much adversity with these people, you form those just pure bonds of connection. And you're trying to navigate, again, I was brought up pretty conservative. I was brought up going to the church, all the rest, and trying to understand, dating and the relationships in the gay world and all the rest. Loyalty is one of my biggest values.
God, you're in trouble.
Yeah, I know, exactly. And it's been a lot for me to learn. And I see a psychologist and a psychiatrist each week as a proactive approach to my mental health, and even having these conversations about how, I just forgot what I was going to say, but it was really, really good. It was really, really good. Throughout the military, I was very emotionally intelligent. Part of my job was to engage with politicians, diplomats, local warlords, understand.
Yeah, but that's the outside of you.
That's emotional intelligence,
yeah.
but not emotionally mature.
Yeah. So
particularly throughout my career, I never had to sit still and deal with and understand emotions. In that first relationship I had in the US, get out of the military on long service leave, go stay in LA with a guy who was a 6'1" Charlie underwear and swimwear model and all the rest. And then having to deal with things like jealousy and all the rest that comes from that sort of bubble.
Because that didn't exist in the military, did it?
No. People ask me, you can imagine so many gay mates are like, the guys are probably like so hot and all this in the military. And
they were, but you didn't see them that way.
I just never had.
Yeah.
I literally never had a lens like that. Repulsed me to even think about it.
But they were family. It's not like you kind of want to throw your leg over your
exactly
brother
and also,
in arms.
Well, also I was their boss, so it's completely inappropriate
even worse
as well. Yeah, and to then transfer that to LA, where it seems the joke is that me and my ex had like one of the only monogamous relationships in LA, was just such a juxtaposition for me that brought up so many emotions that I'd never had to deal with. And as we said before about the whole transitioning piece of veterans, I would also gone from being this commander of commandos in wartime overseas, seen as, the strength of character that I was, to all of a sudden struggling with things like emotions and jealousy. And to admit these things was just such weakness that I wasn't willing to do, and to ask help and have conversations. Instead, I just kept my professional veneer.
But you were still in the military then?
I was still in the military on long service leave.
Right.
But fully, and I practically left my military identity and threw myself into my gay identity, because this was now, I was in love, this is what I wanted to be, this was an experience, close that chapter.
Was it sad to leave that chapter?
I was done.
You were done?
I was done, as is most transitions. The failure that I did was I didn't link the two together, which left me in a bit of trouble later on trying to put the pieces together. For instance, you go from the military in special forces, you're not allowed to have public social media. You're not allowed to have any form of, essentially digital footprint. through to, the gay world, which is just,
Yeah.
if you scroll back far enough on Instagram, yeah, it's very superficial. It's very, social media and all the rest. And I threw myself into that and thought that was what I needed to do to fit in, as opposed to bringing more of me into it, and it caught up with me later, essentially.
Are there any gay sort of liaison officers in the military, or is there any queer support?
There definitely is now. I mean, I can't speak to what there is now. I just know sort of.
But wasn't there when you were?
Well, it was just a different time. So I was in the US 2015, accepting my sexuality.
Wasn't that long ago?
Yeah, but I came back to the US in 2016. We're ramping up for the gay marriage vote.
Right.
And, there were no other openly gay people in the special forces, let alone an officer. And all of a sudden this...
that you knew of.
That I knew of, sorry, openly gay. And I didn't want to be the first. I didn't want it to detract from my career, because it just wasn't... People don't understand this. It just wasn't the culture in the military. You're assessed on your performance, not on who you have sex with in your job outside. Like, guys weren't at work talking about their wives and their kids either. Like, you were just focused on the mission. We were just that busy. That's the way it was.
Hey, I'm going to stop for a second. If I'm ignoring you, if I'm looking at my notes, it's because you've changed direction and I've got to move my notes. But don't apologise. I'm not ignoring you, and I'm not wanting you to stop.
No.
I'm just because I'm watching you watch me.
I'm not fazed by it. You're good.
Good. Oh, good. Okay, just wanted to make sure. There is this wonderful book that was written in 2012, The Velvet Rage, Overcoming the Pain of Growing Up Gay in a Straight Man's World, written by Alan Downs. I don't know if you know.
What's it called? The Purple Rage?
The Velvet Rage.
Oh, Velvet Rage.
The Velvet Rage. How did you process your sexual identity in a predominant heteronormative environment like the military?
Yeah, I thought that there was something wrong with me. It was just a point of difference. And it was...
What was wrong with you? The way you brushed your hair?
No.
The way you tied up your shoelaces?
Just these feelings that I had that, I wasn't as attracted to women as I thought I should be, that I wasn't aspiring to, get married and have kids, that I just wasn't as sexually attracted to women at the end of the day. So, yeah, and that I had this attraction to men every now and then outside of the workplace. So, I mean, look, as the story goes, I literally try to train myself to be straight. I pretty much did my own versions of conversion therapy and went out there and tried to pick up chicks every weekend and be the straightest guy that I could.
Is that a shitty place to find yourself? Like, to compromise?
Well, this is the whole thing though. You don't know what you don't know. So I thought that sexuality was a choice. And this is the conversation.
Where did that come from?
Well, just knowing, particularly where I came from, being a fat kid hoarding lollies on the couch at home.
Which is our next memory. Hold on to that.
with no friends, to a high achieving commander, one of the youngest high achieving commanders in the Special Forces. I knew that if I set my mind to something, I could achieve it. And I thought that so much in life was a choice, including who I choose to be with. I know I could probably sit there and make a life with a woman and have kids if I wanted to. So I just went through the deliberate process of trialing and testing myself. And only on the other side do I look back and say, wow, that was a confusing time that consumed so much energy. But as I was going through it, particularly because I didn't talk to anyone about it and all the rest, I only knew what was my own journey. And for me, it wasn't a struggle. It was just a process.
Were you hiding the real you from you, or from other people who thought you to be a certain way?
Well, I think particularly growing up as a fat bully kid at school, one of the biggest, and even in the military at that time, being called gay or a homo was a derogative thing, and it was weakness, or it was, an insult. So it was definitely something that I didn't want to be based on that external projection. But as I tell everyone, the only person who truly kept me in the closet was me until I was comfortable with it. And to a man, every single person from my former platoon or that I've ever worked with, who I've caught up with since that time, has sort of said to me, and this is what I love about just how high performing and amazing the people in Special Forces were. My guys would come up to me and say, Hesto, just appreciating how high performing you were and the missions we had, to know that you were withholding like 1, 2 or 5% of your energy to suppress or question who you were in any way is incredible for us. Like, we're sorry you didn't feel comfortable to do that, but just to know that you're able to perform to these levels while also dealing with that uncertainty is just really insightful for them. And it was fascinating because there's this funny video that's made a lot of the rounds with all this ABC and media stuff. That's actually me shooting in combat in Afghanistan. And then I say, stop. And I run in front. So we go to try and flank the enemy who is shooting at us. And as I run past my guy's helmet camera, I can see my wrist does this little number. And I remember going back to base because we always then review the helmet cam footage. I saw that and my gut just dropped because I'm like, what is this limp-wristed run? And none of the guys said anything, but it's just, funny how that's where my mindset was at. As opposed to like, I'm there fighting for my life in combat. I'm like, you could have done it a bit more straight, man.
Do you think they noticed?
Well, I've since said no, but I'm the guy who's like in that video. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing with my wrist? They're like, oh, boss doing a bit of a curtsy on the side or something. Like you would, I think that's the greatest form of defense is a good offense. So you just throw it out there and like give yourself shit. That's the sort of culture we had as well. But yeah.
The military, do you think that helped you suppress your sexuality?
It helped me figure out who I am.
It gave you space to do that.
I think it truly tested me and helped me appreciate what was important in life. I think that's particularly what I've carried into and probably I'm in conflict with a lot of sometimes in society.
You're still in conflict with it?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Particularly when you've gone from a place of, I lost soldiers overseas and you just get to appreciate what actually matters in life.
Appreciation and values are words that keep coming up for you a lot, aren't they?
Well, just, what actually makes a person a good person, as opposed to all the layers of composure and inauthenticity that can be thrown up through social media and social life. When you're sitting...
But you choose to engage in it though, don't you?
Well, it's life.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, it is the game of life. And also I appreciate many are still trying to find who they are as well. And my circumstances to do that were through the commandos and combat and all the rest, whereas... life within society can be so much harder.
Do you value that time in the military?
I do. I've had a lot of time to reflect. It helped a young Heston find out what was valuable in life and to form some great friendships and to see how fortunate we do have it here in Australia and other countries. At the same time, it put my family through a lot, and particularly...
But your dad was in the military.
He was. But I think particularly... what my family's had to go through the last 4 years with this whole media piece and seeing how much it's impacted my mum and dad in particular, it's really made me question a lot. While my service was fantastic, the society back here that was responsible for sending us and supporting us afterwards has actually been the key area of failing, hence why I've campaigned for things like the Royal Commission. Let's
go back to a younger Heston.
Oh, God.
Bags of lollies.
Oh, God.
Like lollies were your go-to glutton.
Oh, they were my emotional eating. Emotional eating was my jam, yeah. And lollies just provided me with that sugar rush and enjoyment.
You light up. Your face lights up when you talk about it. It is a happy place, but.
Yeah, I really struggled socially. I think from a young age. Primary school, I was great. I was really good in sports and athletics and all the rest. And then I think parents sort of divorced grade 5. Which back then wasn't the normal. And I remember I particularly struggled.
Did you start going through puberty back then? At that same time? Sorry to
No. I was a late bloomer. I was until like grade 8.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Or 9 in high school. Yeah, I was a late, 7 or 8. Yeah. But particularly grade 8 and 9 in high school, I just put on the weight. I was 5'6", 80 kilos. I've still got stretch marks on my thighs from when I was a big fat boy. Yeah.
So things changed for you like that?
Massively, yeah. And particularly for me, emotional eating became...
Did you know it as emotional eating at the time?
No, I've since through therapy, I've been educated.
Thousands of dollars.
Fortunately, I get a lot of that through the Veterans Affairs. But yeah, just hiding away. This was back in the times of, you have to dial up on the phone, to speak to friends on the weekends. And I was never able to form connections enough with people where they would call me up on the weekends and want to hang out. It was a very lonely time for me. One of my saddest childhood memories is just the constantly sitting there waiting for someone to call saying, do you want to hang out? Do you want to have a sleepover? And that's when from an early age I decided I was joining the military and the rest was a means to an end. But otherwise, going between mum and dad's house, I really turned to food, and in particular like sneaking food,
What was in sneaking the food? What was in that? Why were you sneaking it?
I think rebelling. like you mentioned earlier on, we were brought up in a very wholesome and healthy household, and most of the foods that I chose to eat were not allowed to be had. And I think just knowing that it was bad for me, my therapist say it's sort of a form of self-sabotaging.
But you were very athletic at the time.
I was, yeah.
What drew you to the lollies so hard?
I think they're sweet and just gave you that sugar rush. They give you that dopamine hit, that sort of happiness that you get. Yeah.
And give me a second.
You're right.
But you look, I did see you at the ITA show tucking into the red frogs.
As soon as we sat there and there were red frogs in my bag, I turned to my friend and I said, I fucking love red frogs. And hoed into it. Yeah. And I think I even had some of his as he opened his packet.
How did this indulging in these sweets, I mean, let's face fact, sugar is poison, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is really. So while it's feeling good, but it's actually poisoning the system. How did they support you emotionally?
I don't know. I think this is the whole thing. It sort of gives you that initial hit and then, it wears off. And that's where I just kept hitting it and hitting it and hitting it. Like, I ate to excess just constantly put it into my routine. And I think at the same time, because it was just this whole rebelling piece and I was doing something that I knew I wasn't supposed to do, it just developed this toxic behavioural trend where I actually found satisfaction from doing that.
Did anyone step in and say, Heston, stop with the bags?
They did. I like what you did there. I really like what you did there. No one knew.
No one knew.
Hang on.
So you were a Jan Brady. No one saw you. You were the middle child.
Oh, no, I was just good at hiding.
Concealing.
Oh, this is it. I've been training for Special Forces from a young age.
Well, I did say before you used to go on reconnaissance missions.
That's
to the
it. I like what you did there. Yeah. I didn't just go to reconnaissance. I went all in. But yeah, no, I was very cunning with what I did. Yeah, you'd walk to and from school every day and, and I'd go a different route. I didn't have friends to sort of walk with all the time I was also very entrepreneurial from a young age from, growing plants in vegetables in the garden and selling them at the local market through to I bred mice and rats and sold them at the local market. I was really good at saving my money and my pocket money. And I would, always be able to sort of.
So what, rats and mice and whatever aside, what vegetables were you growing in the garden?
Oh, snow peas, carrots, beetroots.
Were you eating them?
No. No, we ate very healthy at home. Mum's always maintained a vegetable garden and herbs and all the rest. And everything that I ate was in addition to, as opposed to instead of. Was
there a joy in that exchange of selling people?
I loved it.
Yeah,
I loved it.
Interacting with.
Or just making money.
Right.
And I always prided myself on being independent, and I'd put my $5 notes in my underwear drawer and save them up and buy things I wanted.
Is that where we'll find them these days?
No, you won't. So it's called a bank these days.
So looking at you now, it's fair to say you're more hunker than chunker. Looking back, how would hunker you counsel chunker you?
Oh,
no, sorry. How would how would hunker you support chunker you to a better place?
Well, you said it previously. It was about connection, and the key thing that I didn't have outside of my family unit was real connection with people that I found aspirational and that I found comfortable being vulnerable with and having conversations and telling them that I was hoarding lollies, telling them that I didn't know about my sexuality, things like that. So,
do you think that was bubbling underneath?
No, honestly, the sexuality piece, particularly during primary school and high school, I didn't really know. Primary school, no. High school, yeah, there was some confusion there. But then again, I just have this crazy pragmatic head that's able to provide potential solutions to problems, such as maybe it's
this was a solution you could not solve.
Maybe it's just because you don't have friends. Maybe it's just because of this. Maybe you're having these thoughts because you can't get a girlfriend.
Maybe you just hadn't found your people yet.
That's it. Haven't found your tribe. Yeah. Language that I know now but didn't know back then. And particularly not fitting in socially. The whole thing was what's wrong with me, what's wrong with me, what's wrong with me. And the need to conform and fit in as opposed to be your own individual and unique self. That's the biggest lesson I've learned these days. Because even today, I still don't have, another gay special forces officer mate that I can go and sit down with and compare notes. But I don't sort of need to. Everyone's unique. We all have our own stories, and just appreciate you're never going to be the same and you don't need to fit in. You can be uniquely you. That's been a big lesson that I've learned.
And are you still discovering that?
Oh, absolutely. massively.
You having fun?
I am. I mean, particularly as you get older, like, and particularly in the superficiality that is the gay world. Like, I've always prided myself on my physical fitness and all the rest.
We kind of do stigmatize the gay world as being superficial, and I'm probably one of the biggest superficial banner flyers for it. But it serves a purpose.
I agree.
Doesn't it?
It can also be extremely savage because...
Why do you think that is, tribe turning on tribe? Because it wouldn't happen in the military.
Well, the one thing that I've learned is when people attack or put others down, it's either them projecting or protecting some form of insecurity. And I've found that myself as well.
So there's this perpetual thing that's just happening. It's just going like a ping pong ball.
People that aren't fully happy with themselves project onto others. And particularly in the gay community, when I see some people who, don't have the ripped abs and all this, particularly when I see someone who 1 year at Mardi Gras was just, chiseled from stone, and then I know they've been through something like a relationship breakdown or something, and their physique is not to the same standard, and you can see it affect them mentally. But just going over and having those conversations and understanding how much all this externally radiates from what we are internally. And I've 100% been there myself as well. And this is what I love about, I find the US culture for me has been so much more supportive. You go over there to the US, I've gone over to the US and said, I'm going to do this or this. And it's like, yep, you go, girl, get amongst it. Whereas Australia has this tall poppy cutting syndrome, has this default to pessimism. We like to tear people down, either not to their face or behind their back. The amount of whispers and all the rest that have happened these last few years through what I've been through, only for people to come flocking back when you are met with success.
Yeah.
I found it very insightful. But you know what? It's fantastic at decluttering your life and removing those people who are there just for the good times.
But then when these experiences happen, do you find yourself having to work? I mean, I know when those scenarios happen to me, I find myself having to really dig deep and search for my Christian forgiveness.
Yeah,
how do you go with that when they come back and you want to smash them? Let's be real.
Oh, trust me.
I'll come and join you.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they're humans too, and they're walking that same line that we are. So how do you go with moving forward?
Well, I mean,
with them,
people say
you say culling, but I don't think you're a culling.
Yeah, people
type.
say elephants have a long memory, and I do too. This is my issue. I do not forget, and I think.
But you're holding on.
There's the most difference between forgiving and forgetting. I'm definitely with you and can forgive people for what's going on in their own life, but I won't forget that behavior. And I think particularly for me, I'm the person who will have a conversation with someone, like not in public Real Housewives drama, but if someone has chosen to say something behind my back, I'll be like, hey, look, I've actually heard this and I just love to understand what's going on. And this was a lesson I learned during my time in Special Forces. I took over my platoon in the commandos at the age of 26. I was the youngest, and I had some very senior sergeants and soldiers who'd been to Afghanistan 7, 8, 9, 10 times, and I'd never even been once. And there was one guy in particular who was just an amazing performer, but was known to yell at people till they cry. And I remember I just sat him down one day and said, you're an amazing performer, but the way you're doing this, I cannot and will not stand for, yada, yada, yada. We had a very long, lengthy conversation. He just turned to me and said, no one has ever sat me down and had that conversation.
It's taking the time, isn't it?
Well, most people avoid those conversations. And as opposed to having an alpha male off, it's just having the conversation with people. And that's what helped me realize people don't know what they don't know. And I particularly met some friends, not just in the gay community, but just in general, who often get away with that bad behavior until someone sits them down in a positive way to have a practical and progressive conversation with them on it, as opposed to just playing into the drama that people love to drum up, particularly within the gay community.
Let's go back to you entering the Special Forces at the age of 17.
No. I entered the military
at
military.
17. Let's go back. Let's go back to you entering the military at 17. I know where I was doing at 17.
Yeah.
You've seen some shit.
Everyone has.
And, well, not the sort of shit that you've seen.
Yeah.
And you've lived a very different life to the majority of people. I'm not going to mince my words here.
Yeah.
You're a polarizing chap, which is neither a good thing or a bad thing. In fact, I think it's a character strength because you at times can be divisive and decisive because you know what you want and you're not afraid to go out and do it and get it and say it. Few are prepared to die by their sword. Does this come from a military training?
I don't know. I just think I've had the extremes of situations to be able to figure out what I value in life. Having said that, like I think I will die on a hill or, die on my sword over a few things, particularly how you treat people. But I think in particular, like my head is very open to progressive conversations. This has probably been one of the biggest issues I find in the snapshots of media and social media. I get painted as a very serious character, but deep down, I'm just a big kid who wants to play with his dog, have lollies and have fun. And I find it fascinating that you say I'm polarizing. I mean, you and I have just met, but that's the image that's out there.
Well, no, it's not out there. It's just from what I see in my research on you. I think it's a strong thing because when people stick to what they believe in, they can divide.
Yeah.
But you've been very.
I think the key thing I've realized is that I also don't need people to agree with me. I think so many people get caught up in like, this is my opinion.
But you're not afraid anymore of people not agreeing with you?
I'm not. Because if everyone agreed, like where would we be? Like I love constructive conversations. I can't stand people who are like, I believe in this and that's it. With the US election, everything else that's going on, seeing how it fractures people. I love having the conversation to understand why someone thinks some way. And I still am easily influenced by others explaining that to me. Too many people just sit there and say, this is my view, this is my opinion, and I'll gun down anyone else who has a different one. Whereas I like to think I'm much more engaged in a different way.
Is this, again, I reference back the military training. Does this come from military training being open?
I think it does. It comes from being the youngest as a platoon commander, still being responsible for developing the mission and deciding on the mission, but learning the best way to do that was to bring all of my experienced people in to have those conversations and form a collective opinion. So
it's not surprising, like I said before, you've seen stuff. I mean, a lot of us haven't done military training. A lot of us have not been on missions. A lot of us have not been in wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan. A lot of us have not seen that part of life.
The crazy thing is, at the end of the day, to summarize it, you're provided with such an overwhelming purpose, be that life or death or supporting others, that it pushes past any personal issues. It pushes past any requirement for, I'll say, diversity for a diversity's sake. Like you get to see the true diversity of people through their thoughts, through their emotions, through their values, through their experiences, through the insights they bring to the mission, to the plan and all that. You get brought together with the war outside the wire that brings people together in purpose and forges, those experiences under the most extremes of adversity and shows you what's valuable in life. But then you've also got to temper it when you come back in, when you're not provided with that overwhelming purpose, and actually appreciate and treat people like the emotive humans that we are. That's been the big lesson learned.
And still on a young human, I mean, you really haven't experienced much of life, have you?
No. Like I'm smart in military operations, forming teams, taking someone from mediocre to high performance, all the rest. But I suck at relationships. I still suck at truly connecting with people outside of purpose. My love language is acts of service, and I find it great being with people to do things, but just sitting still and being accepted for who I am. I still struggle with the superficialities of the regular world, let alone the gay world. Yeah, there's still a lot that I need to learn, for sure.
Do you think you'll ever find your place?
That's what my current mission is. That's why I'm going back to the US on Friday. I have more of a tribe there. I'd love to move to the US for a bit to get back over there in that culture. But you're right. It's finding your tribe and finding that connection. That's where I'm still not struggling, still learning. Yeah.
Let's move on to your third memory.
Let's do it.
Afghan lamb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. It's very un-Australian, but I'm not a big lamb person.
Wow.
Yeah.
Chicken is your... I've done the research.
Greek as well.
Fucking love lamb. I love lamb. I love cold lamb. I love it. Yeah. Any old way, lamb. Lamity lamb. But chicken is your favourite meat. But in this particular memory, Afghan lamb.
Afghan lamb. I don't want to be inappropriate here, but you know how like camels store water in their humps? So in Afghanistan, they had these sheep that stored water in their backsides. Like they literally had these big bubbly butts when they moved. They just shook from side to side. And it was just water.
Beyonce.
We called them Beyonce sheep. And you'd have the guys on the radio, everyone's got like
this
an earpiece.
This is in their bodies. This is not bags that they drink through a straw.
No, it's like their butt cheeks are just these big watery pillows that twerked from side to side as they walked.
So they're a particular type of lamb.
Yeah. And again, I never really liked lamb, but I remember on one mission, whenever we flew out outside of the wire to do a mission, we always went with Afghan partner force, Afghan military or special police that went with us.
Why?
Well, one, it was their country. And two, they were fantastic at integrating into the human terrain. They spoke the language. They could go, that person's from Pakistan, not from Afghanistan. They shouldn't be here. They just achieved all of those, what we call human terrain aspects that we couldn't as, the foreign people being there doing these military operations. And in particular, some of our missions might last for 1 day. Some might last for 3 days. You take out, your food, your ration pack food with you. But I remember on one occasion, my partner force pulled up we went to this compound, and through the interpreter, they told me, hey, they're actually making some lamb and they're going to make some for us. I was like, I don't really like lamb. I was also a bit funny about eating, the paranoid side of me about eating out on a target. But, as people going around
Explain out on a target.
Just a village. So, for instance, this is the big difference between special forces and sort of regular. We would be tracking this bad guy who we might have lifted a thumbprint off a ball bearing that detonated in a market and killed women and children. It'd go into a system. We'd work with our American friends. We'd find this person. We might find his mobile number.
My skin is just tingling.
Well, we'd be tracking this guy with his mobile phone, with satellites for weeks or months. We'd know exactly where he is. And
so when I say you've experienced stuff that most of us have, please listen to what you're telling me right now.
And this is the other flip side of you don't know what you don't know. For me, it's just common, and only having conversations do I appreciate it's not that common.
I can't even deal. I can't even read my notes.
Well,
can you please keep going? Sorry.
No, for example, recently you had the pages and all that explode in the Middle East through the Israel operations. That doesn't surprise me at all, just given some of the stuff, we've been doing for years with technology that I won't go into to get your podcast shut down. But so we'd know where this person is, and we'd fly on 6, 8, 10 helicopters and land and surround the place and go straight and capture, or if we got into a firefight, defend ourselves and capture or kill the target. And then you're still there. They'd come into local villages, so we couldn't drop a bomb on them. We'd have to go in there physically.
So you actually know where they are and what they're doing.
You've got drones in the sky, 10, 20,000 feet above with, zoomed in cameras watching these people. Yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. And I mean, that's what we trained and that's what we did. But then you're still there with the locals. There's still people there. It's still people's homes.
Are they happy to have you there?
So many times we turn up to a mission and, they knew what was going on. And that's why we again have the partner force. They'd be the ones telling us who was not meant to be there. They're waiting for that moment to be able to help out. Other times, they weren't. Other times, straight away, all the bad guys disappeared and became farmers and all the rest. And the next thing, there's IEDs under the ground trying to blow us up as we walk out of there. Yeah, it was just, it was a very interesting place. No one was in a uniform. Everything was there was a lot of intuition that had to help you out there that you want to learn through experience. But anyway, going back to the lamb.
Experience in a war zone.
Yeah.
Not experience in everyday life.
No, but you know it yourself, even when we sit down here, taking the time to not be looking at everything like a target, but to be picking up people's body language, see how they're behaving. That's why I say I'm very emotionally intelligent, and you had to be, because you're even observing why is no one walking over there even though the terrain shows it's the most natural way to go.
You've really got to trust yourself.
Massively.
So why don't you trust yourself in other areas of your personal life, Heston?
Because you're just not in that fight or flight state.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, there's something to be said about the conditions we went into those situations. Having a whole group of like-minded, like-trained people, having all these resources and technology and equipment. I sort of joke that, if ever we got into some real strife over there, I could call in the finger of God from the sky to help, us win the day. Whereas, back here in society, I mean, I'd sort of say this with my court case and all the rest. All my commanders, all my previous support from defence has been gone. And I've never felt
but you
more.
had a fantastic woman on your team. Let's talk about her later.
Yeah, the lionesses of the law.
Wow, you had a great one there, but sort of,
we should
different. Get back to the food memory.
We should. So Afghan lamb. And anyway, I remember my interpreter ended up bringing me over some of this lamb. He's like, boss, you need to try this. It's not he just knew I didn't like lamb. And so I tried it, and it was the most tender and flavoursome, particularly the texture of the meat was just absolutely incredible. And it wasn't fatty. It wasn't like marbled. I don't know. It was just the way they cooked it as well. And it wasn't like herbs and I don't like spice like chili, but just the natural flavors and the natural ingredients they use to add flavor to it. Like still to this day, you know, if I knew somewhere there was like proper Afghan lamb, I'd actually go and eat it. It was fantastic. And you're usually left with some of the sauce at the end, and they made like a beautiful bread that you would sort of dip and finish it off.
Were there any other carbs with it? Was it rice?
No. They made this white sauce that was kind of like made from an animal's milk. And I tried that once and it literally nearly killed me. I had the worst gastro I've ever had in my life.
Right through you.
You imagine being out on a mission overnight with my medic having to put IV bags in me and fading in and out of like delirium, and him saying we might need to bring in the helicopter to casually evacuate the boss out of there. I was that bad. Trying to like go through your gastro moments quietly at night time tactically, it was just death. Yeah.
What was food like in camp?
Brilliant. Yeah, really good. One of the benefits of special forces is that we had to do really hard physical missions, but back at base, they really looked after us food-wise. You know, you could have your multiple chicken breasts, rice, sweet potato, broccoli, all the rest. Right the way through to lots of sort of fresh food, fresh fruit and all the rest. Particularly in Afghanistan, we were very fortunate to be supported by the US delivery system. So literally every day or every 2 days, there'd be new food and fresh food flying in. It was really impressive. The US does the big war really, really well. I mean, there was a Starbucks outside the big camp and things like that. Yeah.
Why do the US do the big war really well?
They have a different mindset. If they want something, they do it, and they sort of ask for forgiveness later. Whereas Australia is very much ask for forgiveness first and go through all the layers of red tape in order to get it. I sort of joke that deployment to Afghanistan in 2012, we were there for Halloween and the US Green Berets, the ODA guys we were with, wanted to have a bit of a dress-up party for Halloween. Within 7 days, my guys got a set of Teletubby outfits sent from the US Postal Service over to Afghanistan. You know, it was incredible.
Your social cause, it's an Australian first initiative that you set up and poured buckets of money into. It's called the Veteran Games.
Yes.
What is the Veteran Games?
So a lot of people know about the Invictus Games, which is about getting sick, injured and ill veterans back into adaptive sports like wheelchair rugby, all this sort of stuff. The Royal Commission particularly identified that the highest at-risk demographic of mental ill health and suicidality was young men under the age of 40 or veterans under the age of 40 who are still physically capable but have loss of purpose, loss of community connection, and this loss of identity piece. So we developed the Veteran Games, which requires them to reach out and form their own team of 8 to 10, so establishing that connection, and then train up with a purpose to compete in activities drawn from their military identity. So obstacle courses, casualty evacuations, you know, navigating these obstacles with a stretcher and with equipment, going back to some of the fundamentals we're all taught during our basic military training. And it's run over a weekend at the Gold Coast. And what we also do is bring in vendors from veteran services. You know, there might be a veteran financial service or an allied health provider or physio. We have ice baths, all the rest. We also have fresh food vendors, because even most of our nutrition in the military is what you're served at the mess. High carbohydrates, all the rest. And a lot of veterans actually struggle with their weight and nutrition when they transition out, because you're not actually taught what you should be eating. Most of us were brought up in the good old food pyramid, all that sort of stuff.
What happens to a veteran when he's discharged, transitioned?
So discharge and transitioning from the military.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I know in our culture it's very different.
Got it. So what actually happens to that officer?
That person, I mean, whole varies of individual journeys, but most of them sort of go through this period where they leave because they have a new job and throw themselves into it, or they leave because they're disillusioned, or they leave because they're injured. And they're very different for each. But most of them sort of go through this period where everything's fine, and then sort of if they haven't transitioned with the right mindset or with the right processes, there's a bit of an adjustment period, and there's a bit of a isolation period from the veteran community. Some people go on and have successful lives, but it's particularly those who fall into that level of isolation and uncertainty and aren't willing to reach out and ask for help that we're trying to sort of proactively target to come to an enjoying event that requires that physical component as well.
So it's one thing to have these services, but it's another thing to actually teach these veterans to ask for them?
Also trying to navigate the space. Like, you Google veteran services, there's so much out there, and it's actually so overwhelming. And in particular, it's about, reassembling the tribe. It takes a village not only to raise a child, but to help people sometimes rediscover who they are outside of purpose and community. So it's about assembling some of these services for them to bring their families, to bring their kids, and go have conversations face to face, instead of sit there over line and be overwhelmed by so much of the information and content that's out there.
How important are the veteran games to the community?
Really, really important. I mean, we just had our second games this year. It's doubled in size from the previous year. We filmed a documentary. People can go to veterangames.com to have a look. And you've got veterans younger than me saying, hey, I didn't want to leave the house. I didn't want to do this. I've suddenly found a team of mates that I've been down at the local park training every weekend, and we're already training up for next year. Giving them that purpose, giving them that community and that connection.
So it's more than a competition. It's more than a tough mudder.
Oh, massively.
Yeah.
It's all about getting people to engage in physical activity, knowing the mental health benefits they have, but more importantly, to connect with a team to do so. And some people have literally re-established a social network outside of their own life, outside of their own individual lives, families, with their veteran mates again. And also because you're connecting with people who have had some form of a similar journey to you, the conversations flow more naturally. Your ability to be vulnerable flows more naturally, and there's actually real progression. And particularly when I have veterans come up to me and say, hey, you speaking out about your own mental health struggles and all the rest has realised that I'm allowed to do that as well, and has given me permission to do that. And it's just providing that space to be vulnerable and also learn, hey, what did you do to help yourself out? I did this, this, and this. I go see this doctor. I go see this physio. Learning through others, which again is what I realised I wish I had throughout my career, discovering my own sexuality. But we can do this as a veteran community to help each other in that transition period back to normal life.
Have you had comments from other veterans from other wars, like the Vietnam War and things like that? How do they see all this? I bet they wish they had it when they came out.
So the Vietnam veteran community in particular have been probably even my personal biggest supporters behind the scenes. My grandfather fought in Vietnam and Korea, and when this whole ABC defamation stuff started, he's the one who said, don't let them treat you and your soldiers the way they were treated mine after Vietnam. And so many Vietnam veterans have said, it took the government 50 years to apologise to us. You need to do what you can now to support your team and hopefully get the impact that is required to do so, hence the Royal Commission as well. So it's been brilliant. And even at the Veteran Games, like we had Vietnam veterans there last year as volunteers.
I'm getting emotional.
Helping to support. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And even, I guess you get to see, I have to be careful with my words here. You know what
you can say it and we can edit it.
No, you know what it's like when you get to see your parents become grandparents and get to see them get that second win. Particularly seeing some of the Vietnam veterans who really haven't engaged with the community since a long, long time.
It was hard for them, wasn't it?
Massively. But then come to the Veteran Games and be there like helping, to move things around or, sign people in or just providing, crowd escort, just being like, I'm just happy to be here and be a part of this and reconnect with the veteran community. It's been incredible to see that. And it gives perspective for the younger veterans who it's easy to sometimes get entitled with all these things that are provided for you to, just have that learning loop expand that a little bit more. Yeah.
How can we support veterans games?
Veterangames.com.
Yeah.
Help to spread the awareness. Like in the world of social media, if people can go there and just have a look at and go to our Instagram and go to our YouTube and have a look at some of these small little videos with young veterans sharing their stories and share them on their socials to help raise the awareness would be amazing. I mean, my mission the last 2 years has been trying to get government grants and support. As we all know, it comes from noise and numbers. If there's enough talk about these things on the ground, those who need our votes, particularly coming up to election next year, will need that impact. But particularly for me, the wider narrative is just understanding and appreciating veterans more in Australia, similar to what I get to see in the US. There are a lot of organisations within Australia who profit off veterans just simply being seen as broken. And like, we're not. Like, I've been through my own mental health struggles, but every single person who's lived through COVID, a relationship breakdown, a loss of career has also struggled through these things in Australian society. And like, mental health is just a factor of life. We're not all broken. We have a unique perspective going from the extremes of what I've learned through to everyday life. And just to appreciate what we have been through. We don't know what we don't know. So perhaps if you see us in everyday life, to have some of those everyday conversations is fantastic to have. but just to also appreciate what we can bring to the situation, the friendship, the environment, the workplace as well. It's just about awareness and understanding, as opposed to like, oh, you're a veteran, you must have PTSD, you must have seen some shit. For sure. But I'm also fit, capable and good to go. And I don't need to be put on a pedestal. I just need to be treated like a normal person, essentially.
What do you want for the future for Veterans Affairs and support in this country?
I'd love to see a veteran actually be the Veteran Affairs Minister. That would be incredible. I think that's not a bridge too far, surely.
A voice for the community.
Absolutely. And one that actually has the respect of the community. You can imagine how tribalised our community is. And we just keep getting
quite a topical.
Yeah.
It's quite a topical thing you're talking about here. Well, and it's far-reaching.
Yeah. But we keep having politicians appointed because as a junior ministry position, and, you know, they're just bobbleheads. I've had personal experience with lots of them. Just through to greater support for veterans on the outside. Not, you know, the Royal Commission's identified all these findings. Coming up to election next year, every political party and independent just needs to say, hey, we're going to implement these findings that we've just spent millions of taxpayers' dollars over the last 3 years to do. And just to make sure that we are supporting the younger generation of veterans going through, not waiting until, you know, we're all grey in the hair to finally appreciate, oh, we didn't do the right thing.
We have an MFK Fisher Serve It Forth tradition here at TFM.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Where our previous guest presents you with a dish. Catherine Bennell Pegg, our very first Australian astronaut, has served you space food in a tube. Now, to be quite honest, I can't remember exactly what it was because I've lost the audio somewhere.
I've had some space food. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
But she stopped to really think, Heston, now what could I get for Heston that's really healthy, full of nutrients and flavour, and to keep him entertained and enjoying his food. I'm so sorry, but I will find it and post what it was.
You're right.
She spent a lot of time considering your training when she put together this particular dish that I can't remember. Our next guest is Ellen Harrell, the Californian surf girl comedian who also writes for the New York Magazine.
Oh,
what
wow.
would you like to serve?
Californian.
I'm just going to tell you she's 24.
Okay.
She's as cute as a button.
California.
She's funnier than you.
So what I love about California is that they think they invented avocado on toast. Like you go to every Californian, cafe and
ooh, she's going to take you to town.
Everything's got avocado on toast. So I think like we definitely need to go with some like Australian sourdough with avocado and like delicious poached eggs. But then they also don't do breakfast over there as well. So she needs to have some beautiful sauteed mushrooms, some wilted spinach on the side, and some beautiful fresh salmon on the side as well.
And a big bag of lollies on the table next to the coffee.
This is it. Their lollies are terrible. What do they love? They love, what's a good Australian lolly she needs to have afterwards because she needs something sweet to finish.
Is she allowed to have the red frogs?
Yeah, but like real Australian.
Well, Fantails, but they don't make them
No,
anymore.
they don't. Disappointing. Oh, there's this lolly in my head and I just can't get it out at the moment. No, we're going to run with is it Allen's? Allen's Red Frogs.
Sponsored by Allen's.
Allen's Red Frogs. Yeah. Real Allen's Red Frogs, not the crap they have there in the US.
Before we go, Australia has a long history of veterans who have fought in conflicts that most times were never our own.
Mm-hmm.
And it is with deep gratitude to veterans like you that Australia can enjoy liberties, freedoms, and human rights unheard of in many places around the world. As a military officer, a public servant, charged with the responsibility to uphold these liberties and our liberties and our freedoms, but has protecting the country come at the cost of your own liberty and freedoms?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Service comes with the sacrifice of individuality and of a normal life outside of the military, which I never truly appreciated until I've left. Choosing to go off and fight conflicts is one thing, but just not developing a life properly outside of the military until that finishes is something that I've really appreciated is kind of the real service and sacrifice of a military career, particularly for the families that are then left to pick up the pieces or left to support us afterwards. Absolutely.
Heston, thank you for your conviction to our freedom and the care and support you give to the people who maintain it. Big love, mate.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of 3 Food Memories.